I would wish to talk of research and how we look at its quality in a microscopic fashion. When we talk of quality, there are at various levels we can talk of quality. The very unfortunate situation today is that quality is not decided by us, but decided by somebody else. For example, we eat food. We know what its quality is, whether when it is bad, we know, when it is good, we know. But if somebody else comes and measures and tells you that this food is of good quality, and you are supposed to eat and then assume that it is of good quality, that would be a very strange situation. That is the situation today, when quality of whatever we are doing is measured by an external agency based on some parameters, some of which may not have really anything to do with quality as such. But these are very, very generic measures by which quality is being looked at. I really do not know whether anybody else can measure a quality of something that we apply our soul on. While I say this, I do not rule out the fact that there needs to be checks and balances and there needs to be external review. I do agree to that, and I think it is a necessary thing to do that. However, I sincerely feel that we must have our own measures of quality and our own perception of quality, which we independently need to develop and practice. Do not wait for NAC or NARF or the QS world ranking to tell us what is good or bad. The danger with the institutional ranking is, let us assume that there is an excellent institution, ideally an excellent institution, which has 99 excellent teachers, but one very mediocre teacher. Now, when the whole institution is branded as excellent, this one mediocre teacher gets that branding. Now, think of an institution which is not up to the mark, or you could say very so-called bad institution. 99% of teachers there are, let us say, bad, and one teacher is exceptional. But then all of them are branded bad. The excellent teacher is also branded bad because the college is branded as, let us say, B or C or any grade of that kind. That tells us why we need to have our own feel about what is quality, and based on our own parameters, and which continuously, of course, needs to grow, which needs to develop, and we need to continuously reassess it. I'm not saying that we have our own measures and we stick to it and we say we don't accept anything else. No, we need to be doubtful of ourselves. Now, one very simple phrase I would like to put forward for discussion. The quality assurance cell of the Kerala University has a byline or a motto which says quality through continuous improvement. I would say that is a very, very good phrase, very actionable phrase, which says if you are saying you have produced quality in something, then you must be continuously improving it. If you are not, then it is a very obvious sign that there is no quality in it. Let us look at examinations at the university level. Examinations. Compare it with schools. If there are people among you who are seniors like me, I wrote my SSLC examination maybe 40 years ago, 40 or 41 years ago. During that time, the question paper of the the 10th year examination, public examination, was very different from what is there today. There is a sea change. Now, I don't want to go into a discussion whether which question paper is good, which has assessment system is good. But all that I would like to say is that the assessment system has undergone major transformation in the last 40 years. That is how I see it. Now, I look at the engineering degree examination question paper, which I wrote maybe 35 years ago, and compare it with what is being given in the engineering colleges today, I compare, I would say the change is minimal. If you look at universities, I actually have a bunch of samples of question papers from 1954 in my university in political science and the question paper today in MA political science. If you photocopy it and do not reveal its age and you give it to teachers, then they will not be able to distinguish which is question paper from 1950s and which is question paper from 2020, because some questions seem to be of the same style, even the same questions are repeated. So I would say that we have not achieved quality in assessment by the very simple test that there has been no change. So when there is no change, there is a very good sign that quality has not been maintained, provided in the first instance there was quality. If there was quality, then you don't need to, you can say you don't need major changes. But still, when time changes, what was of good quality in olden times will have to be relooked at. So look at all aspects of your research and ask, have you gone through change? So the same test that I have given to you can be applied to, for example, research in education. You look at a research paper coming out of a department, compare it with a research paper 25 years ago. Is it basically talking about a hypothesis? It is talking about some data being collected and then doing a statistical analysis, talking about some correlation, some factor analysis, and finally some conclusion. Well, to me, I have a family background to have seen research papers in education 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So whenever I see a new research paper in education journal, I involuntarily compare it with what I saw in my childhood. And I make a comparison. So if there is not much change in the form and content of that research paper, I would assume we are not doing quality research. Now, let me now go on to making some very specific points. If somebody asks you, how do you raise quality of research? Let us say in education, what is the actionable answer that I can give? See, I can go on. I'm not competent to actually answer this question in a subject-wise manner. But if I was, then I could have gone on to make a lot of suggestions about how research is to be done. But instead of doing any of those, I could simply say, what is your target of publishing? This is a microscopic thing as far as quality of research is concerned. When you ask yourself, all the teachers who are in front of me, you must ask yourself, what is your target of publishing? Where do you want to publish? Where have you been publishing? So typically the answers are, you have a journal published by a local university. For example, the Kerala University used to have a journal called Studies in Education. I do not know whether it is in publication now. I think it is not. Madras University has a publication in education. So you have local journals. And today, because publishing is very easy, you have a large number of journals being published by educational institutions at not the level of the university, but at the level of the college itself. Many colleges publish journals. For example, the Government Training College in Trivandrum, they publish a journal. Another college of education that I know in Tamil Nadu, NVKSD College of Education, publishes a journal. Now, if your research is aimed at such journals, now you might say these journals, of course, are good journals. They are recognized by UGC. They are in the CARE list, that list, this list. But my point is, well, if you want to argue, then I'm not there for that argument. You can say, well, it is. By definition, it is. UGC recognizes it. But we don't look for UGC's recognition. We look for the research community worldwide. What is their recognition? I would say none of these journals are internationally recognized. Even if some of these journals have international articles, they are not internationally recognized. I'm very, very sure about it. I'm willing to debate it. But let us talk about one journal about which such an argument cannot be strongly be made. The Harvard Education Review, HER. So if a young teacher in education comes and asks me, there is no reason for them to come and ask me. They are better people to ask. But if they ask me, what should I do to raise the quality of my research? I would simply tell that young person, please aim to publish in Harvard Education Review. Very simple action point. I won't say anything else. Just aim to publish in Harvard Education Review. It's a very tough task to publish in Harvard Education Review. It is not a bad thing to try and fail, because failing before a very admirable target is better than succeeding against a very weak target. So I would say, if any of you try sending a paper to Harvard Education Review and it does not get published, that itself is a credit. That is my take on the whole issue. So friends, I would like to tell you that in universities, the quality of research in different faculties are different. This has something to do with tradition. For example, I've never seen a science student happy with publishing in a local journal, because there is a tradition of people claiming pride in publishing in internationally established journals. For example, in science, similar to what I said for education, in science, if you ask me what should you do to achieve highest quality of publication, I would say a very workable thumb rule is to target publishing in Nature and Science. These are the two topmost journals about which there is no debate whatsoever. If you publish a paper in Nature, then nobody need to ask you how good is your work, because it has to be good, otherwise it would not appear in Nature and Science. I must confess, I don't have a paper in Nature or Science. The closest I have come to is that Nature has a subsidiary publication called the Nature Scientific Reports, in which I have published. But let me tell you, you can claim topmost quality of research only when you have a paper in Nature and Science. In scientific field, that is very well understood, very well understood. So for every field, you have to locate. I'm told there are teachers of management. Then I would say, okay, why don't you try publishing in Harvard Management Review, like the Harvard Education Review. Now, I only cited one instance. There could be other very creditable journals that are that publish research in education and management, and there need not be any doubt about it, about their quality. The top established journals are very well known. Everybody knows. I would say departments must create a wish list of journals to publish, and that wish list would be very rigorous. For very simple logic, I would say it should not contain any local journals. It should not contain local journals. A wish list of a department in Kerala should not contain a journal from Kerala, because the obvious chance of compromise on getting papers published. Now, I would also tell you why I say this. In Kerala, for example, most of these journals work on goodwill, recognition of goodwill. You know, I'm a person with slight interdisciplinary interests. So I have published in a journal published by the Kerala University, actually one of the oldest journals of the Kerala University. That journal is called the International Journal of Kerala Studies. So I published thrice in it. 3 long papers I published. But in all the 3 papers, I did not get a review. I think that my papers were worth publishing, but still I'm telling you, I did not get a review. Nobody read my paper and sent me a critical review. So if you have published and you have not got a critical review, it is very obvious sign that the journal is not of good quality. So local journals, instead of asking whether you appear in care list, actually what we should look for is, after you submit the paper, did you get a review? Not 1 review, 3 reviews. If you send a paper to Nature or Science, you get 3 reviews. and mostly a rejection with a very long list of things to do to improve your work. So if this is not being done, then you have not raised the bar of research. This is what I would like to say. What I am saying, you're welcome to debate and raise this issue and debate this. But I sincerely feel that certain faculties still have not established a tradition of targeting the highest journals, the topmost journals in the world. Now, I wouldn't say that anything published outside India is better and what is published in India is bad. No, I don't have any such notion. But it is a safe bet that you published in an international journal published from outside India, which has long standing as print journal. This is a very important point. It has been published last 50 years. That means there is a great tradition associated with it. Such journals we must target. And if you start publishing in it, your quality of your research automatically goes up. And the mechanism is that the peer review forces you to change your standards. So this is one point I would like to make. How do you raise quality of research? You aim at undoubted quality international journals. For education, I have already made my suggestion. I'm sure you are all very eminent people who know of other journals. I'm not a person in the field, so I can only say one journal which comes to my mind, which is the Harvard Education Review. Now, number two is that I see that a class of research being done in social science deals with data collection, statistical analysis, and then its interpretation. Now, data collection and statistical analysis, these are two aspects. The statistical analysis, we today have very sophisticated softwares which can do that. I think you are all familiar, or you've all heard of the software called R, which is used to do statistical analysis of huge data. And analyzing data is actually not a great challenge today compared to what it was 30, 40 years ago. 40 years ago, again, I am telling you because of my family background, of my father being a researcher in education. I remember his students coming with large scrolls of paper in which a lot of columns are drawn and a lot of numbers are written there. He multiplies the first column with the second column, second with the third, and then sums up these in another column. And they would actually fold the paper so that the columns which they want to operate on comes close by. They fold the paper conveniently. That is why, and afterwards they spread it out. That is why such data is even today called a spreadsheet. So data, those days data had to be hand computed. I'm talking about late 1960s and early 1970s. My father and mother would sit together and process their data by hand. They did not even have a calculator. Calculators came in early 1970s, or late 1970s. And the supervising teacher had no idea if they said that a correlation, there is a strong correlation. The supervising teacher cannot really verify quickly because the data is a huge data and he cannot sit and recalculate. So my father's professor was a very cruel person, it seems. He would take all these data sheets. You remember there is no photocopier either. He would take all these and then tell them to come after 1 month so that he could verify. And after 1 month, when the candidate comes, the professor says, "I'm sorry, I lost those papers. You have to recalculate." And the poor researcher goes back and copies data again from the data sheets and makes spreadsheets, calculates and computes the correlation and comes back to the professor. And then the professor brings back this old sheets which he had with him and double checks. So that means he is actually forcing the student to do it twice independently and then double check whether it is accurate. These were days. Now, you don't have a problem like that. If you have data, you have very correct analysis that is provided by the softwares. You have no challenge. You can do this analysis in a matter of a couple of days, if not lesser. And all that remains is to interpret it. And even beautiful graphs are produced by these softwares. You just need to say what which data to manage and which chart to produce. You want a pie chart, it produces pie chart, histogram, it produces histogram. It has all become child's play. Very easy to do that. But what still remains exactly the same compared to 40 years ago is how do you capture this data? In social science, most of the research captures data through surveys. There are subjects in which there are experiments that are done. For example, psychology, you may do a experiment with human subjects which are not asking them to fill up data but observe and collect data. That is also there. But generally, I would say most students in social science do research with a data collection based on a form. Even today, I filled a form. One of the research students had sent out a form giving a questionnaire which is asking you about your pattern of usage of social media. And I was actually taken aback filling that form. It asked some very blunt questions like, do you think that everybody else is doing better? Do you feel very dejected? Because that student assumes that using his or her hypothesis is that use of the social media produces some psychological disorder, and he or she seems to directly ask these questions very bluntly. And conducting a survey in olden times used to be costly, time consuming, and energy consuming. For example, if you wanted a number of teachers to do a survey, you have to seek the permission of a principal and then seek 1 hour of the teachers, and all the teachers come to a hall, and then you administer the survey there and take back the sheets. Or you send by post this questionnaire to each of these teachers with a self-addressed stamped envelope. Now, nothing of this. You send a Google form. And earlier, that form, the data collection sheets have to be collected back, and then you have to read each of them and write them into a chart, a large chart, and then summarize them. Today, nothing of this. The Google form is sent, and if 100 people answer, today evening you have the 100 data compilation with graphs. So what I am saying is the mechanical process of collecting data and making an analysis of it, or making a statistical, drawing out the statistical picture of the data has become very trivial today. But I would like to tell you, making the questionnaire remains as difficult, important as 40 years ago or 100 years ago. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Designing a questionnaire happens here, not on the computer, not on the paper. It happens here. There is no way that anything else can help you rather than you thinking. But I often think the quality of our research goes down at this particular point. Because the collecting of the data, the process of collecting the data, the process of compiling the data, the process of analyzing it, all have become electronic, that they're all perfect. But the questionnaire is entirely dependent on your intellect, the research students or research guides intellect. And when students come to do a survey, I basically ask them, how many times did you rewrite your questionnaire? Because it is a leading question and they understand that I am trying to see whether they have rewritten it well. I think some of them do give a higher estimate than what they have done. Sometimes they say 4, 5, 6. But as a research supervisor myself, as a researcher, I would say, humble researcher, I would say, if you have not corrected your questionnaire 10 to 20 times, major corrections have not been done, then the quality of your research output is compromised. This is my thesis. I know you can argue with me, but I firmly believe that I see social science research, the questionnaire is not up to mark. In a questionnaire, there are 2 levels in which you have to think about. What are the items that you will include in the questionnaire? What is the aim of including those items? And how it relates to verifying your hypothesis. But in addition to that, there is an important point. How these items are phrased and the choices are designed. That is also important. These are two things. These are two things. And very often I have felt that many students don't understand the human element of survey. There is something called a human element of survey. My father tells me, I discuss these with him, he tells me that only when a person who is undertaking a survey, a subject, will be sincere in answering the survey if they understand the purpose of the survey. So you cannot just go and ask somebody, give me 5 minutes, all that I need is 5 minutes, please fill up this. That is not the way to approach a subject to do a survey. But it is more of motivating them about what the survey will reveal, what the survey is studying about. And number two, I am yet to see, I think many of you also, if you're teachers or researchers, you also end up being subjects of survey. So you're given a survey. Each question, I'm a person whom I think I keep my critical mind open. So I cannot actually accept any question used asked in typical surveys, because they are leading questions, one. Number two, the options given for me to answer actually force me to say things which I don't want to. There is no open end for me to come out of the question from the choices that are given for the question and express the real feel. That is all because the question paper, the survey design has not been done very scientifically. And no pilot has possibly been done. If a pilot is done, if you, for example, design a survey and give it to me for a pilot, I'm a very good person for that, because I can find 10 problems with each of your question in the survey. So I would say, and when the notion of making 20 revisions of a survey could be very different from what I am talking about. When I say make 20 versions, 20 times corrections, 10 to 20 times, I really mean a continuous overhaul of the question, the survey questionnaire. Sometimes students think that I make a printout, I make some small changes here and there, I change one option of the answer, I make a spelling correction, I make a layout correction. They call it one revision. No, that is not a revision. A revision is when you touch the soul of the survey and you make changes which touch the soul of the survey. Only if that is done, you can call it a revision. I will call it a revision only then. In fact, in my supervising style, what I do is, when students write research papers, in my subject, we have no survey. We have only scientific experiment. And the data, the number of data is actually very small for us. So that the final data that comes to our hand. So I ask them to write the research paper and come to me only after they themselves critically revise it 10 times. So, students can just come back and tell me, sir, this is my version 10. But I don't take that word. I tell them in advance, my research scholars know, when they submit a paper to me, they have to submit the earlier 10 versions to me so that I can see what they've done. And I tell them not to correct in soft copy because the correction cannot be seen. So I tell them, write a draft paper, print it out, and then make your corrections with the red ink on it. And then incorporate into the soft copy, print it out again, and then again read and discuss and then correct. So that I turn pages, I can see what is the rigor with which a critical mind has been applied. Whether it has been simply reformatting and changing words here and there, small changes and small additions, that I can see very quickly when the earlier versions are given. So even if they say 10 versions, I will not accept it. I understand that they have not been severely critical. Another option is also to just withdraw the questionnaire. The student can be asked to ignore completely that questionnaire. Don't look at that soft copy again. Don't look at that hard copy again. Do it afresh. This could make a very good restart. The experience of the draft writing is there in the mind, but when you do it afresh, new ideas may come. Actually, the researcher grows a lot with the questionnaire design. And yet another point is that some students, when they do the survey, they do not have in their mind what is going to happen after the survey. But the survey questionnaire is very closely linked to what you will do afterwards. So one thing that the student could do is design a questionnaire, do a dummy filling of it or a pilot study of the survey. You administer it on 5 people and then produce all your results. When you start producing your results, you find that some of the questions actually very misleading and are not suitable for producing some proper results. So you reflect back on the questionnaire. So the output that you draw from a survey actually can be used to modify the survey. That is why the pilot survey is very, very important. You get to know some very practical issues. So this is like, if you are very young, you might be in the process of building your own house. In the plan, everything might look fine in the house. But when you start living, you find that you have some inconveniences or some conveniences which were not expected earlier. Only when you live in the house, you will understand. So what happens is most people actually, when they live in a house, they start living in a house, they do small alterations or, minor modifications. They make a small partition here, there, make a stand here. Because when you really go into use, you find real problems. So similarly, no survey should be permitted to be administered on a large volume of peoples, of subjects, without pilot running and revising. See, I'm saying all this based on the surveys that I see. I have no idea of what you're all doing as research guides and as researchers. I do not know. So I may be wrong about what I am saying. But I will tell you, I am saying what I am saying based on a number of surveys that research scholars in my university bring to me for filling up, not for any advice. They just want me to fill up. I'm just a subject for them. But unfortunately, I cannot be a subject. I constantly criticize them. When they come with a survey, I tell them how. And I earlier said, the human mind is not considered by them when making a survey. I'm sent a PDF document with 50 pages and somebody asked me to fill up this, do the survey. So they take my time for granted. They don't understand what filling up 50 pages mean. This is all terrible. You cannot be giving a survey with 100 questions to a person and expect that by courtesy they will fill. I sometimes really feel very sad. A student sends me yesterday. A student from North India sends me a questionnaire, a long questionnaire, and I thought very long that I find it very difficult to answer them. Take time to answer them. Not only that, they don't understand the ergonomics of it. For example, a person at my age, I don't want to go and fill the form myself. So I want somebody else to fill it. Somebody else to print out and bring it to me. So I will write with pen and then they will go and answer it. So I sent it to my secretary and project assistant, and asked her to print out. She comes back and tells me if that form is filled, it will be 50 pages. So how do I print out 50 pages? So the person who sends out all this does not think of any of this. You cannot, some surveys are so tiring. And when it is very tiring and very demanding, some questions are very demanding, you have 25 options, you huge table and all that. You finally end up, after some time, you lose sincerity. And you just tick somewhere and just get done with it. And then the quality of your data is compromised. You do very serious analysis, but this guy has just kind of randomly ticked data because it is very tiring to do that. If some of you want to know about this, you go and search Google about a word called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue. There is a limit to the decisions that you can take in one go. So if you have 50 questions, which is some of which are very sensitive and very, I would say, even offensive, and you are supposed to decide what your response to that is. And 50 responses in one go will create fatigue, great amount of fatigue. So the survey also has to be made as small as possible. You cannot be asking too many questions unnecessarily. I still don't understand. Today I said I filled up a questionnaire and they have asked whether I'm a Hindu. I mean, the religion is asked. I don't know why. Why should it be asked? Because the questionnaire has something to do with your psychological problems with the social media. I'm sure religion has some effect because some religious teachings has some effect. But in the modern society, we ignore this. In public life, we assume that this religion has no effect and it is a personal matter. Now, there are many other personal matters which might affect our social media behavior. For example, your sexual life, but you don't ask questions about that. You cannot. So similarly, the religious things should not be asked in that questionnaire unless, of course, it is a main variable for your problem. So, and questions are asked without, my reading is that questions are asked without any kind of a control, that they just think that they can ask any number of questions and people don't mind. So people who are very busy, people who are very senior, I would like to tell you, they hate surveys. They don't like surveys. And if you give a survey which is so smooth to answer, very easy to answer, and so minimal, and you are motivated to do that survey, then possibly you would sit and do that. If I were a researcher today, a social science researcher today, I actually would ask a person, a subject. First of all, I would ask, motivate them to do the survey. And then I would ask them, sir, are you comfortable with paper? Do you actually like working with paper? Or do you like a Google form to be used? Because somebody may not be very comfortable with a Google form and you are sending a Google form to them. Like me, I don't like filling up a Google form. So I send it to my assistant to print out. So I'll be very happy if you bring a piece of paper and tell me, okay, please fill. Because I like working on paper. And then number two, these students think that this is a work to be done away with. So they come and ask me, sir, this is my form. I have to submit my thesis next week. So will you fill it now? Now, please note, a 50 question survey cannot be filled now. A senior person might be stressed with so many other things, administrative things, family things, his health issues, and that particular time may not be suitable for him at all. But then the student comes and sits in front, and I'm also a human being. I feel so bad that this student is being kept waiting, and the student has to come again to your office to collect this piece of paper. But all that goes to the disadvantage of the student. So I get away with the survey, and then I don't apply my mind in answering many questions. What happens? The student gets bad quality data. That is what the final thing is. So these are some matters related with social science research. I would say that the data collection aspect has to be, a great amount of training has to be given to teachers and research scholars, so that the data collection is taken as a very, very, very serious matter, which affects quality of research. You may not know where the quality is lacking because this doesn't show up. You have collected data through a questionnaire, but all these questionnaires were administered in a rush, and the questions were not properly designed, and people were forced to answer it. Then your data is actually absurd. And when the data is absurd, it doesn't show up in the statistical analysis. The statistical package does not know whether the person is writing truth or not. Then again, of course, there are mechanisms to double check whether a person is consistent in their attitude, etc. I do not know whether everybody does that in the survey. So finally, when the paper is written, I find that in certain disciplines, there is a run-of-the-mill paper production. You state a hypothesis, a null hypothesis, you collect data, you give some table with very standard figures of statistical analysis, and then a very small part of the conclusion, very small area of conclusion. I would say a research paper looks, we accept all the other parts, but a research paper, its real value, I would think, comes in the end of the paper, where you have a discussion, a very scholarly discussion, which goes beyond saying that there is good correlation or bad correlation, negative correlation or whatever, but goes beyond that and makes very, very scholarly debates and discussions about what the statistical analysis means. So this I find is missing in many social science work. And why that is missing is because you publish in non-standard journals. Had you sent it to an international journal, then the experience would have been different. Now, from a science perspective, I would like to tell you, see, I'm a person who thinks faculties should not be compared. For example, a researcher doing research in Sanskrit or Malayalam cannot be compared with science. You cannot say that their research is better or worse than the research in science, because these are two subjects cannot be compared, should not be compared. If you compare, you come to very wrong conclusions. For example, you say, somebody says this guy has published in science journal and the other guy has published in Vijnana Kairali, which is not a great journal known outside. But you know, you Malayalam person cannot go and publish in science because that is not their tradition, and the science will not accept their paper either. So what is the point in comparing? They cannot do this. It is not their cup of tea to publish in a science journal. And the scientists cannot get published in, they cannot take their result and publish in Vijnana Kairali either. That also does not work. So I would say each subject must have or does have its own norms. But I'm just sharing for you to know. My research publication experience, I would like to tell you. I've published in very top journals. I'm a modest researcher. I have about 50 good papers, research papers. My career spanning about 30 years, 25 years of actual very active research. I have about 50 papers. Of these 50 papers, I would say 10 papers are very good. And they appear in all international journals, journals outside India. And I think you all know that we talk about impact factor and all. These journals have very good impact factor, 5 to 10. Now, I keep aside all that, and I would say the 10 papers are good. I know that they are good. I must also say that these hard work of these papers are not done by me, but by my research scholars. I have to only mentor them and guide them and look at the problem at a top level, criticize them, motivate them. That is my role. But still. And what is an experience of how these papers are published? Now, I will tell you my experience of publishing, trying to publish a paper in the journal Science. I said that I have a publication in its subsidiary journal, not the main journal. Main journal I have not been able to publish, in spite of my efforts. So when I sent a paper once to the Science magazine from US, you know, its impact factor is 35. So I sent a paper, and in another 1 week, it was rejected. It was not accepted for publication. So I was not given any information. It was called a desk rejection. Desk rejection means it did not go to a subject expert. They have their own officers who are generally scientists, not expert in any particular subject. But at their level itself, they threw out the paper. So there was no information that we have decided that your paper cannot be taken forward for review, and they rejected it. So I published it in another good journal, but not journal of the standing of science. So I was very curious to know what happened to the paper. So luckily, in another 1.5 years, one of the editors of the science journal came to Trivandrum, and she gave a talk in Rajiv Gandhi Center for Biotechnology, a very famous research institution in Trivandrum. And I had an invitation, so I went there. So I was expecting that this would be a very, very senior scientist. So I went there. I was actually very amused. It was a young girl. She must have been barely 30 years old, or 25 to 30 years old, a very lean young girl, a South Asian girl, who is a PhD, she has taken a PhD in the last 5 years or so. And she is the editor the assistant editor who rejected the paper, who rejects papers, not mine, who rejects the paper. So after the talk, I listened to her talk, and then I went and talked to her. I asked her, I had sent a paper to your journal. It was rejected. It is okay. You know, I've accepted that rejection. So I told her, I just would like to know what did you do with that paper and how you would actually process that paper. So she asked me, do you have it? I said, yes, I had the printout with me. So I gave it to her. So she turned the pages, and in between she asked, "What is this paper doing?" Oh, I said, "I developed such and such algorithm for comparing genomic sequences, and I've got a better result in comparing genomic sequences compared to the existing method." So she asked me, while browsing through the paper, she asked me, "Oh, okay, on how many cases have you reported your better results?" Oh, I said, "I reported on 3 cases. One of very close by sequence, then medium distance sequences, and wide distance sequences." That means I took all 3 range of cases. The moment I said this, she closed the paper and gave it back to me. She said, "That is why it is rejected." I said, "What is wrong with that?" Then she told me, "Oh, you should have reported the result on 200,000 sequences, at least 200,000 sequences." So my notion was that it works for a very close by comparison, distant comparison, very distant comparison. Then that is it. But she thinks for 200,000 cases it should have been reported. Then we would have looked at it. Now, this question basically is not raised by a lower journal. So, in research in social science also, your sample size, you have a very funny name for that called convenience sampling. I don't know what that is. Whose convenience and how is it relevant to the research that you're doing? Convenience sampling. I think convenience sampling means, in the short time you can only do this, so you do that. That is not a scientific justification. So a representative sampling, which is of a size which is arguable as enough to represent the population, are these really addressed in social science research rigorously? I doubt. The reason being that these publications happen in goodwill journals. If it went to a rigorous top quality journals, then it should have been different. Then we would have got a signal that no, this kind of sample data cannot be used to generalize what you said. So I've said a few things, not really very comprehensive, but I shared my mind as a researcher as how quality of research can be improved at various stages in some of the selected aspects. I did not talk about everything, some of the selected aspects. I know very well that many of the researchers in front of me, your experienced people, or your upcoming researchers, and you have your own takes on this. Please come forward and share those, ask questions, disagree with me or debate with me. You're welcome to do that. I close with one final word. I am at the fag end of my career. I have 3-4 years more to complete my research career in the university. So it's time to look back. And if I look back and I ask myself, oh, what should I have done better? If I had a restart, how would I have done better? Because, with this much of experience when I look back. Well, the answer for me is very simple. I should have published less. If I should have published less, I would have done it with more quality. If you produce 25 papers a year, you go to 12 conferences a year, then your output, the quality of your output is, to me, it looks as if it is going to be less likely to have good quality compared to you sitting on a project, but you very intensely look at that particular research project and ensure that you do everything in the best way possible. And one paper comes out, but that comes out in topmost journal. That would have been better than 25 papers in journals which are goodwill journals, which are all around. So I end my presentation here, and I look forward to your critical remarks and discussions. Over to you, Dr. Samir. You can manage the discussions.